So welcome to Berwick Barracks. My name is Sophie, I'm the site manager here. Berwick Barracks was built in 1717 and they finished building it in 1721. So that was when they started fitting it out and buying plates and cups and furniture and things like that. It also means that we're very close to having a 300th anniversary next year as well. Before the barracks were built, soldiers were billeted in pubs, and I'll let you imagine how well that worked out. It ended up being that the Crown owed a lot of money to the pubs, and there were lots of things like breakages, a lot of unruly soldiers. Before barracks, there was really no regimental life. It was get up, have a walk around, maybe do a bit of training and come back. So when the barracks were built, we really started to see this change of, no, I think maybe we should get the soldiers trained up and we should teach them how to use a gun. Maybe that will come in handy. The original plans were made by Nicholas Hawksmoor, who's a very famous architect who worked on a lot of buildings in London, especially the churches and places like Castle Howard. So a very famous Baroque style architect in that time. However, Nicholas Hawksmoor made his designs very elaborate, very much in the Baroque style, very pretty, and the military thought this was far too nice. We just can't have this. So a military engineer, Captain Thomas Phillip, took the designs and started taking away the pretty bits and thought, we don't need that, we won't have this. And that's why we have this very intimidating looking building here today. But if you look very closely, you'll see a few of these pretty details still around. One of them being in the officers' blocks, we have the distinction of the rounded windows opposed to the straight windows. So that's one way to tell the difference, and there's lots of little details like that. Originally, it was built to house over 600 men. So each room would have 8 men to one room, 2 to a bed. So the conditions weren't great. So while the barracks was built for very big reasons, very political reasons, to safeguard the nation's economy, its roads, and ultimately its monarchy, the barracks also tells a very personal human story about the lives of the men who lived here, as well as their families.
Hi, I'm Rachel and I'm the curator of Hadrian's Wall and the North East. And that just means that I care for the objects in English Heritage's collection. So we've heard about the history of the building, but what about the soldiers that lived here? It was a really big change coming into this permanent garrison where all these soldiers are together and not dispersed throughout the town. And Sophie's mentioned some of the trouble that happened with the innkeepers and their bills not being paid, which often led to, disagreements between the soldiers and the townspeople. But with history, we often hear about the generals, we hear about the battles, we hear about those big figures, but we don't tend to hear about the people, the individuals fighting in these armies and what their lives would have been like. And what's amazing is here at the barracks in Berwick that we actually have some insight into what these people were interested in, who they might have been, and what they did with their spare time. So at Berwick Barracks, we have these unique drawings done by the soldiers, and they're called smoke drawings or candle writing. And they're very unusual. There's only a few examples within England, and we find them on the ceiling. So these smoke drawings give a really personal insight into the lives of the soldiers and how they would have spent their time. And we heard from Sophie that things weren't necessarily easy when the soldiers were billeted with the innkeepers and the pubs within Berwick, that sort of mischief happened. And certainly court records, even after the barracks were built to house these soldiers, suggest that there was still some problems between the townsfolk and the soldiers. So the relationships with the townspeople weren't always as smooth as perhaps everyone would have liked, because we hear about all sorts of different stories to do with the soldiers stealing, to do with sort of fraternising, getting on a little bit too well with the wives of the townspeople and also their daughters. But what we do know about the time that they spent together in the barracks was there were 8 to a room, and there were probably long periods spent indoors. So we get a real insight into what the soldiers did with their free time with these smoke drawings, but also what their interests were. So we know from the archives that not every single soldier could write. So perhaps some of them are representing themselves through the pictures that they make on the ceiling, or potentially by animals and other symbols. But we do also have initials, dates, and sometimes full names. So it gives us an insight into the lives of these soldiers that we wouldn't necessarily otherwise have. And this is really important when we usually talk about the wider brushstrokes of history, looking at the generals and the battles and the wars. Through this, we've got much more of an insight into the everyday life of a soldier, what it would have been like to live in the barracks, what it would have been like to live in Berwick. It wasn't easy or quick to make these drawings. You weren't just picking up a pen and doodling in the margins of a notebook, or they weren't necessarily thought to be permanent. It's not like they were etching their names with a sort of sharp implement into stone or into wood. These were potentially things that could have been painted over in 20 years and lost to us forever. But they sat down and they sacrificed their playing cards, one less thing to do in the evening, and they cut them up and they made pictures. And they stuck them to the ceiling as stencils and then held candles to them, and the soot from the candles sort of left these images, these stencil images on the ceiling. And that's what's brilliant about them, is that we have over 100. We have full names and we have initials and we have dates, which is how we know roughly when some of these pictures sort of date to. So we know it's kind of maybe 1740s, 1750s, probably a bit later as well. But I mean, we're talking over 300 years ago that people made these on the ceiling and then probably left and forgot about them. So we were really lucky to be partnered with Young Archaeologist Club Flodden, and it was really great to get the reactions from the young people that we were working with. They were really interested in the smoke drawings. We went and explored more of the stories in the archives to find out what the lives of the soldiers would have been like. And then they created animations based off these drawings.
My favourite things were animating the mystical toilet and working with others. It's really good. It's quite fun to make.
Well, I was pretty surprised about the smoke drawings because I never knew soldiers and did that.
So it was really good to get a completely different take on what the really sort of human and people stories of Berwick Barracks would have been like.
I think there was quite a lot that they were surprised by. We've never really explored the barracks as a site before, which is strange because in the winter, we're really lucky. Museums Northumberland let us use Berwick Museum, which is within the barracks, but Berwick Museum is the town museum, so it doesn't actually tell the story of the barracks. So to explore the barracks, we've never done it before, and they found out lots of things that they didn't know before. They didn't know that some of the outbuildings were actually stores for the barracks, and they had lots of objects from the site itself and from across Northumberland. The archives, they loved going into the archives, and they found all the stories and the photographs about how the site had changed and the stories of the soldiers. I think they just absolutely loved that because there were some quite dramatic and interesting stories about the soldiers and the mischief they got up to and everything else they did. And just looking at the site itself, the lovely posh windows that the officers had compared to the little plain windows that the ordinary soldiers had, and the comparison between the officers and the everyday soldiers on site. And it was nice to get an insight into the life of an everyday soldier. Where did they sleep? What did they eat? What were the toilets like? We saw the toilet in the store, which absolutely had them enthralled, working out how many bottoms might have sat on that toilet. It was just amazing.
Well, my first favourite thing is seeing things that normal people would normally not like, them going in to that big shed with the old toilets, old post boxes, and that was really fun. But the other thing I really like, because I've actually never knowing, I never knew they were doing smoke drawings, so I quite like looking at the smoke drawings as well.
So during the Shout Out Loud project, first we visited the smoke drawings in situ, and then we came behind the scenes to see the other smoke drawings that we have in storage. And we can split these images up mainly into sort of three main groups. So we have sort of architecture, And we believe that one of the most popular stencils, and it definitely seems to have been reused, either someone was really pleased with that work that they did, or he lent it around his mates and everyone had a crack at doing that version on the ceiling. And we think that's probably Berwick Town Hall. It didn't catch their imagination enough to be a full-on exact representation of Berwick Town Hall. There's some bits that don't quite line up, but compared to everything else that we found within Berwick, comparing it with all the other buildings, it really must have been the town hall that they were aiming to make an image of on the ceiling. And the other groups that we have animals, and that ranges from everything. We have horses, we have birds, we have a goat thing that could well be also a unicorn. It's not entirely clear, but I think what's important was that they did give it their best effort. We have shoes, but we also have portraits of, or what we think are portraits of some of the soldiers. So we think we've got them in their uniform. It's been pointed out that it's probably a long overcoat. Some of them are carrying either swords or rifles. Some appear to be on horses. And so we don't know whether they're self-portraits, whether they're caricatures of the officers that they served under, or whether they're meant to be portraits of their mates. But what we do know is that this is a lasting image of some of the people that lived in Berwick Barracks in Berwick upon Tweed.
So yeah, I think they learned quite a lot, and it was just a variety of activities. So learning how to make plaster, and then actually having a go at doing their own smoke drawings. Up until that point, you know they're enjoying it and you know they're taking in some of the information, but it's only when they sort of delve back into it all and try to think about how they can share what they found out that you realise they have really taken on board a lot. And so it was when they started thinking up their stories for their animations, you could see, wow, you really were getting involved in this project, and it's, you know, in the archives, picking up on all those stories. So a few of the boys did a story that came directly from the archives. Some of the other groups, they were really nice. They were almost like dream sequences. So it was as if they were imagining the soldiers lying in those little beds looking up at the ceiling and looking at the animals in the smoke drawings, and then creating these kind of almost like dreams that the soldiers might have had. So it was lovely seeing the different ways that they responded to basically the same artefacts and the same historical story, but they interpreted it in such different ways. And it was wonderful. It was really nice to see, and they loved it. They would have stayed for weeks doing that if they could have done. They would come back day after day. They absolutely loved it. And they were so proud of the finished output when they saw their films. You could see how proud they were. And because it was a longer project, we were able to build in the Heritage Hero Awards. So at the end, they all got an award, as well as having their completed piece of artwork, their little films. They also got an award at the end of it, which I think they really liked. And the parents really appreciated that as well.
Do you think differently about Berwick Barracks now that you've finished the project?
Well, I had to. This is the first time I knew this was called the Berwick Barracks. And then it's the first time I've been, like not been, but experienced it.
Yeah.
So really for our first time, it was really good. I'm pretty inspiring.
Thank you.